You know, I think a couple of the speakers have already mentioned the idea that COVID has literally kicked over our checkerboard and totally disrupted all our classic traditional HCP tactics. And when this happened, and we're thinking about the diminution of access by reps, the absence of dinner meetings, the absence of congresses and conventions, you know, the most potent tools seem to be taken away from us. So I went hat in my hand to my brilliant colleague, Dawn, and said, what's going on in the DTC world? What's going on in the world of patient marketing that we can adapt and in some cases shamelessly steal to make up for the fact that our toolkit has been seriously diminished? And we came up with 4 basic areas. First was to look at patient stories, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Second is to leverage, encourage, and stimulate peer-to-peer conversations. And if you've ever been to a dinner meeting, you've seen that happen live and in person, where peers talk to each other, challenge each other, share information, and look at problems in similar kinds of ways where there's a lot of persuasion going on. Third, we want to look at different kinds of content types. We've been locked into VisAge, we've been locked into journal covers, we've been locked into reprints, we've been locked into a lot of different tactics over time, and it's time to change those up. And lastly, goes to something that Dylan was saying, you want to get beyond the product. You want to look at a premium experience that takes into account, and Linda mentioned this as well, takes into account not only the clinical areas, but the workflow and the experience, the total experience that the HCP has in terms of running the practice and running his or her organization. So let's jump in. The first thing is to spotlight patients. Now, this is a very interesting and tricky area because for the most part, there's a kind of a natural disconnect between patients and their physicians. They don't see things the same way. In many cases, and unfortunately, most physicians are not like Dr. MJ. They are not patient-centric. They are focused on cases rather than people. They project kind of a clinical antiseptic kind of demeanor, and they've built a kind of a filter that says, I'm going to listen to what patients have to say, but I know that they exaggerate the pain. I know that they whine about the condition. I know that they bring in a lot of what seems to be irrelevant kind of topics. I know that they've got a fair amount of anxiety, and I'm going to discount this as I understand what they're trying to tell me. So there's this kind of filtration effect. The other thing that's interesting is that physicians are reluctant to talk about patient stories. We recently asked 326 endocrinologists what kind of information they would want from us for a particular client. And only 6% asked for patient stories, which says that 94% weren't that interested. However, when we began to expose patient stories to this audience, and we did this through Sermo, we found that the awareness of the burden of treatment, the awareness of convenience issues, the awareness of insurance issues, the awareness of cost issues went significantly up. So on one hand, they tell us they don't want patient stories. On the other hand, they respond to patient stories, which reminds us that in most persuasive and sales situations, people buy people, and then goods and services are transacted subsequently. So the idea is to spotlight the patients, to sensitize HCPs to the needs for care beyond the specific symptom control.
On the DTC side, we can often be challenged by the limitations of a label or having generic competition. So Synthroid is a great example of both of those. The Synthroid label, Synthroid is labeled for the change in a test result, not for symptoms. And we all know that patients talk symptoms. So the change in a test is not nearly as powerful or as engaging a message. In addition, we're also challenged with Synthroid, that is a 60-year-old medication that is in a world entirely generic or very close to entirely generic. So one of the things that I would suggest is another great technique that can be stolen is to empower your audiences to have peer conversations that can bring out some of the messages that we can't say as the brand, and have those nuanced conversations that we can't have for them. And in addition to bringing out those conversations, they also have much more credibility if they're coming from a peer, whether that's a patient on the DTC side or a practitioner on the HCP side.
So this idea of stimulating peer-to-peer conversations, the analog we take from the patient side to the DTC side is, can we stimulate physicians talking to each other and inject the conversation with persuasive points to help us and help market our brands? And the answer is yes. The biggest opportunity of this, we think, takes place in what we call the walled gardens, the physician-only platforms, which all of whom, Sermo, Doximity, Medscape, and Skipta, have all reported huge spikes in membership and in usage as a result of the pandemic. So in the case of Sermo, you have a curated newsfeed, and a very interesting phenomenon here. In some specialties, there are robust conversations, and in some cases, contentious conversations about treatment and clinical issues. In other specialties, there are crickets. So you've got to look at the different specialty to figure it out. On the other hand, the drug ratings are very popular. The polls and surveys are very effective. And what's very interesting about the polls and surveys are twofold. Number one, the answers from the polls and surveys can be used in promotional materials. And number two, Sermo has the functionality to follow up these conversations. So if someone takes a poll and answers a question in a particular way, that answer can trigger an automatic email to follow up on that particular topic. So that the platforms have been thinking about and building technology to help us motivate these kinds of interactions. And lastly, these clinical challenges where physicians get an opportunity to test their own knowledge and compare their knowledge with others. And this is particularly valuable when we go to Skipta, which has a little more of an editorial, more of an academic flavor. But they have two very interesting features that involve generating this peer-to-peer conversation. The first is a featured case discussion where you lay out a case as if you were on grand rounds and physicians respond to it. We have found for a number of our clients that we have picked up very interesting intelligence, in some cases which mirrors what the field force is telling us, in other cases which surfaces objections and questions and scientific issues that may not have reached the field force yet. So it's an intelligence tool, it's a motivational tool, it's a peer-to-peer conversational tool. And the best of all is that the content is pre-cleared for use in promotional materials. So not only does it give you insight and intelligence, it gives you copy and messaging. The other new feature that they have is something called Gather, which is an online ad board where they will guarantee a certain number of physicians participate in the conversation. And you can parse the conversation so that you can stimulate the conversation almost in real time. So Dr. A lays out his point of view, Dr. B lays out her point of view. There can be an intervention, there can be a changing of questions, there can be a changing of directions so that you truly get an ongoing conversation by people in your target audience who have the appropriate clinical and scientific expertise to really generate not only intelligence, but insight and messaging information. When we think about changing the context of and changing the content aimed at HCPs, I want to go back to something that Mark said earlier, which is you want to do something that's familiar. And one of the most familiar things around is this notion of a quiz, which Dawn has been used to massive effect on the patient side. We then began to create some quizzes aimed at HCPs, aimed at particular conditions, pointing at issues in the marketplace. And we found a number of things. First, this psychological kind of idea that a quiz kind of triggers an emotional response. In some case, and to some extent, as Linda was saying, its impact is easy. There's a challenge. There's a natural familiarity with it. And there's some kind of ego enhancing kind of functionality where people want to benchmark themselves, where there's an opportunity to educate somebody, but in a fun kind of way, and also achieve some mastery of a topic in ways that might be unexpected. We took this quiz to a virtual Congress, and one of the things we found was that the response and engagement to the quiz was 10 times greater than every other tactic used in the Congress And that included the KOL presentation, that included the virtual booth, that included the clinical studies data sets, but that the quiz was the thing that drove engagement, drove excitement, was shared on social media. And it reminds us, something that we frequently don't focus on, that physicians and doctors are people too, that they respond to the same kind of stimuli in many cases that patients do. And that gives us hope in terms of building different kinds of content structures to engage and persuade them.
Another absolutely stealable idea, and this was already referenced some in a few ways, is to create a premium experience. Great example on that on the DTC side is the Humira Complete program. The team at AbbVie listened to the patients and found places they could add value. And these ranged from onboarding help to adherence and everything in between. It includes apps, nurse ambassadors, delivery and disposal of sharps containers, travel kits, and various other things. And in addition to being supportive and having this structure built, they've taken it to where the patient is. And that's really critically important. So their support services extend to, for some products, the website, where there's a web chat that can give you all of the same service that calling into a phone number can. And in other instances, we have Humira Complete live in social media with a 24/7 by 360 as well. So finding a way to create value and a premium service for your patients is a huge value add.
And this idea of creating an experience has become critical in the digital world and the world of non-personal promotion, where the overall experience, the clinical experience, the scientific experience, the interaction experience, the patient experience, the office and the administrative experience, all are part of the consideration set. And the idea is to create a premium experience which focuses on, and I think Linda mentioned this, kind of the mechanics and the workflow of a practice, to kind of take a customer service mentality toward a practice, toward the issues that affect the practice, toward the speed bumps that they encounter every day. So one of our clients built a very comprehensive kind of customer service, customer access focused on HCPs, where they zeroed in on the roadblocks to adoption, not only for their treatment, but the roadblocks in general to the overall practice. And they looked at how could we alleviate some of these burdens? So things like checking insurance coverage, checking formulary coverage, pre-authorization, organizing specialty pharmacy for their products, and also handling the mechanics of mobile interactions. In one case, they hired phlebotomists to go out and do the blood draws necessary as a prerequisite to prescribing and dosing their preparation. So the idea being to relieve the HCP and practice stress by doing it for them, by creating a premium experience that takes into the totality of their universe and gives them the opportunity, as Dr. MJ was saying, to have less administrative needs and more patient care, more patient focus.
So we hope you found that there were some stealable ideas here. And whether it's using patient stories to connect with the physicians, leveraging the peer conversations to deliver your messages with more credibility, using quizzes and other new content types to engage and differentiate, or that premium experience we just talked about, we hope that these are useful.
One last thing in terms of a premium experience, if you are up for it, we've put the link to a quiz that we're doing with the DHC team on social media in the chat, and we encourage you to give it a shot. You'll notice from the pie chart that only 6% of the people that have taken the quiz so far scored at genius level in terms of their understanding of social media and how to use it to impact HCPs. So if you're up for it, take a look at the link in the chat. And if you have additional questions, Don and I will be available at your convenience.